Hi, my name's Jeremy Singer. It's nice to meet you. I want to talk to you today about two priests from the Old Testament. Two priests who in fact became prophets. Their names are Jeremiah and Ezekiel. So we're going to read from Jeremiah chapter 1 to start with. Let's read about the call of this prophet, Jeremiah chapter 1. Here we are, Jeremiah 1 verse 1. The words of Jeremiah, the son of Hilkiah of the priests that were in Anathoth in the land of Benjamin, to whom the word of the Lord came in the days of Josiah, son of Ammon, king of Judah, in the 13th year of his reign. It came also in the reign in the days of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, unto the end of the 11th year of Zedekiah, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, unto the carrying away of Jerusalem captive in the 5th month. Then the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Before I formed thee in the belly I knew thee. Before thou camest forth out of the womb I sanctified thee, and I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations. Then said I, Lord God, behold, I cannot speak, for I am a child. But the Lord said unto me, Say not, I am a child, for thou shalt go to all that I shall send thee, and whatsoever I command thee, thou shalt speak. Chapter 2, verse 13. For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed them out cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water. Then over, please, to Jeremiah chapter 31. Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 31. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel, with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they break, though I was an husband unto them, saith the Lord. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith the Lord, I will put my law in their inward parts, and write it in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they shall teach no more every man his neighbour, and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them unto the greater, saith the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. Over to Ezekiel now. Ezekiel, and we'll start in chapter 1. Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 1. Now it came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month, in the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captives by the river of Chebar, that the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. In the 5th day of the month, which was the 5th year of King Jehoiakim's captivity, the word of the Lord came expressly unto Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Chebar, and the hand of the Lord was there upon him. Over to chapter 3. No, chapter 2. Ezekiel 2, verse 1. And he said unto me, Son of man, stand upon thy feet, and I will speak unto thee. And the Spirit entered into me, when he spake unto me, and set me upon my feet, that I heard him that spake unto me. And he said unto me, Son of man, I send thee to the children of Israel, to a rebellious nation that hath rebelled against me. They and their fathers transgressed against me, even to this very day. For they are impudent children and stiff-hearted. I do send thee unto them. And thou shalt say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God. And they, whether they will hear or whether they will forbear, for their rebellious house, shall yet know that there hath been a prophet among them. Chapter 3, verse 4. Ezekiel 3, verse 4. He said unto me, Son of man, go, get thee unto the house of Israel, and speak with my words unto them. For thou art not sent to a people of a strange speech and of a hard language, but to the house of Israel. Not to many people of a strange speech and of hard language, whose words thou canst not understand. Surely, had I sent thee to them, they would have hearkened unto thee, but the house of Israel will not hearken unto thee. For they will not hearken unto me, for all the house of Israel are impudent and hard-hearted. Okay, then a little bit further on, let's read from chapter 40. Ezekiel chapter 40, verse 1. In the 25th year of our captivity, in the beginning of the year, in the 10th day of the month, the 14th year after that the city was smitten, the selfsame day the hand of the Lord was upon me, and brought me thither. In the visions of God brought he me into the land of Israel, and set me upon a very high mountain, which was as the frame of a city, by which was as the frame of a city on the south. he brought me thither, and behold, there was a man whose appearance was like the appearance of brass, with a line of flax in his hand, and a measuring reed, and he stood in the gate. The man said unto me, Son of man, behold with thine eyes, and hear with thine ears, and set thine heart upon all that I shall show thee, for the intent that I might show thee them unto thee, what thou brought hither. Declare all that thou seest to the house of Israel. Well, the Lord will bless his word to us this evening. So, Jeremiah and Ezekiel. We know these two men as prophets, don't we? Two of the four major prophets in our Old Testament. But in fact, and we read about this, these two men started out life as priests. They were born into priestly families. It's interesting, isn't it, to think about how often children follow the careers of their parents. You know, many people are second generation doctors or teachers or lawyers. Well, in Old Testament times, the office of the priest was hereditary. A son would follow a father into priestly service, as ordained by the Lord himself. That's why the priests were so often called the sons of Aaron. The priesthood was for Aaron and his descendants forever. So, tonight we're going to focus on two individuals who should have been priests, but actually are better known in our Bibles as prophets, Jeremiah and Ezekiel. We read how both men came from priestly families. Ezekiel the priest from the family of Buzai, and Jeremiah of the priests of Anathoth, descendant of Hilkiah. But for different reasons, neither of these men was permitted to serve in the temple at Jerusalem, to work as a priest. We know that Jeremiah endured a ban from the temple because of his preaching. Jeremiah 36 tells us that. And later on, Jeremiah was imprisoned, and so he was unable to go to the temple then. At least Jeremiah was in Jerusalem, the city where the temple was. Ezekiel had been captured by the Babylonians, and so he was in exile, away from Jerusalem, living by the river Kibar, in a slave colony there, serving the Babylonian king. So Jeremiah was in Jerusalem, the last days of Judah's kingdom, the end of the 6th century, the beginning of the 5th century BC. Ezekiel, at the same time, he was a contemporary of Jeremiah, was in exile in Babylonian captivity. Now, here's an interesting point. Although both men must have felt that they were restricted, that their opportunities for service were dramatically curtailed, yet God, in his sovereignty, still had a purpose for these two seemingly redundant priests. God made this clear to Jeremiah, didn't he? We read in Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5, God says, I have appointed you, I have ordained you to be a prophet to the nations. Jeremiah 1 verse 5. And again to Ezekiel twice. God says in chapter 4, Son of man, I send you. I do send you unto them. Ezekiel 2 verse 4. This theme of divine sovereignty, this idea that God is in control and his will must be accomplished, this is writ large across Old Testament prophecy, isn't it? I suppose Jeremiah is the one who neatly encapsulates the thought of God's purpose being fulfilled in our lives with that beautiful and oft quoted verse from Jeremiah 29 verse 11. I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. I think this is the English Standard Version here. Plans for peace and not disaster. Plans to give you a future filled with hope. And while that may and does apply to Israel, the nation in general, I think it can apply to individuals too. I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. That was certainly true for Jeremiah and Ezekiel. In divine providence, each man is in the right place at the right time, able to serve God. God always has his servants in the right place, doesn't he? Able to witness for him and to represent him to the people there. So what we're going to do for the remainder of our time is to think about three themes which occur in both these prophecies, Jeremiah and Ezekiel, a consistent message to God's people in three parts. We're going to see how the themes are: number one, exposing ritualism; number two, forecasting ruin; and number three, anticipating recovery. So let's look at these three themes. Number one, exposing ritualism. How often, when the Lord's people grow complacent in their devotion, does ritual replace reality? We put on a show outside because there's sin inside. Outward busyness cloaks inward barrenness. I think that was true for the Pharisees, wasn't it, in the Lord's time? I think that was true of the assembly at Laodicea in John the Apostle's time in the Revelation. And it seems that that was certainly true for Jeremiah and Ezekiel. We can diagnose this spiritual malady, this tragedy in Jeremiah's day. Look at how the people take refuge in chanting. Here's Jeremiah chapter 7 verse 4. The temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord are these. God says, amend your ways and your doings. And the people say, oh, we've got the temple, we're fine. And ignore all their sinful behaviour. What are they doing? They're swindling and robbing others in their business dealings. They're oppressing and abusing people who can't help themselves, the orphans and the widows. They are, worst of all, following after heathen gods. Idolatry is taking place in Jerusalem. So, for all their ritual and all their trust in the temple, these people's hearts are far from God. Ezekiel shows us even worse. We get a sneak peek with Ezekiel into the activities that are taking place in the temple. If you look at Ezekiel chapter 8, we see there's a hole in the wall, not at the bank, but rather at the temple. Ezekiel chapter 8 verse 7, behold, a hole in the wall. And Ezekiel looks through and he sees wicked abominations. There are idols in the house of God. How tragic. This most sacred space in Jerusalem, the temple itself, is filled with idols. And the people are worshipping them. So there's ritual, but there's no reality. I wonder whether we could ever fall into the same sin, whether we could be exposed to the same danger. Well, I'm challenging myself here as well as I hope you. It's easy, isn't it, to go through the motion of devotion when really our hearts are cold and far from the Lord. That's ritualism. And that's what Jeremiah and Ezekiel exposed and preached against. Here is a second theme in these two prophet priests' messages. Both men predicted the oncoming destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. They knew that God was going to deliver the kingdom of Judah up to captivity, and his city, the place where he placed his name, Jehovah would deliver it up to destruction. How it must have hurt Jeremiah's and Ezekiel's national pride to tell the ransacking of their city. How it must have hurt their priestly instinct to tell of the demolition of the temple. But this was the message that had been committed to them. So this was the message that they were obliged to tell. In Ezekiel chapter 3, God says to Ezekiel, look, you've got to tell the people this message. It's your responsibility. Listen to Ezekiel 3 verse 17. Son of man, I've made thee a watchman to the house of Israel. Hear the word of my mouth, give them warning from me. Verse 19, if you warn the wicked, he turn not from his wickedness or his wicked way, he shall die in his iniquity, but you have delivered your soul. So you see, Ezekiel has this responsibility to proclaim the message, to pass it on. And as we think of ourselves, 25 centuries later, we too have a message and a responsibility to deliver that message to people round about us. We can't shy away from communicating what at times seems like uncomfortable gospel truths in our society. We have a responsibility to preach the message. The love of Christ constrains us, says Paul. I'm a debtor to Jews and to the Gentiles. How shall they hear without a preacher? Romans chapter 10. So, we too have this responsibility to proclaim the message. We notice further that both Jeremiah and Ezekiel were touched personally by their message of doom and destruction. Jeremiah himself was forbidden from marrying. Here are stark words in Jeremiah 16. Listen to this. Jeremiah 16, verse 1. The word of the Lord came also unto me, saying, Thou shalt not take thee a wife, neither shalt thou have sons or daughters in this place. And the reason is because the city was ripe for destruction, and any family that be born here would die terrible deaths. And so God says, no, you're not going to have a wife or a family. So that man makes this sacrifice, this decision to be isolated for God because he knows of the destruction that's coming. Ezekiel's in a different position. We turn to Ezekiel chapter 24 and find out there that Ezekiel is married. He does have a wife who God wonderfully calls the delight of your eyes. The desire of your eyes, Ezekiel 24 verse 16. But listen to what's going to happen to Ezekiel's wife. Ezekiel 24 verse 18. I spake to the people in the morning, and at evening my wife died. And Ezekiel was forbidden from crying, was to make no mourning for the dead, to cover not his lips, and to eat not the bread of men. So there was to be no mourning for Ezekiel for his wife's being taken from him. And this was to be a sign to the people that Jerusalem was going to fall, but the people would be lacking in distress and in mourning because they were so caught up in their Babylonian captivity. What a burden this prophecy was to these men, how it touched their lives in intimate sorrow, their family lives, their individual circumstances, as they would proclaim the message. And you know what? I suppose it gave their message real authenticity, the fact that it was so deeply ingrained in their lives and in their behaviour and in their family circumstances. There was a genuine note to their preaching because of the impact it had had on the men themselves. Again, is that a challenge to us? How real is the message of God to us? How much does it cost us? How much has it impacted us? That's a challenge, isn't it? Let me come to the third of these prophetic themes now, and this is the idea of anticipating recovery. Anticipating recovery. And if the first two are somewhat negative, this is delightfully, wholly positive. The Old Testament prophetic message is so optimistic. There is a future for God's people. Ruin will be succeeded by recovery. This was true in the 4th, 5th century BC. The Babylonian captivity would be completed in 70 years. Jeremiah himself prophesied this in Jeremiah 25, verse 11, Jeremiah 29, verse 10, and indeed Daniel, reading Jeremiah's prophecy in Babylon, knew that the captivity was coming to an end, that the people would return in a second exodus to the promised land. But ultimately, there is still a future day of deliverance, a day of blessing for Israel, God's earthly people. Paul explains this in the New Testament. Listen to Romans 11 verse 26. And so all Israel shall be saved, as it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant unto them, when I shall take away their sins. this national restoration of Israel involves a new covenant. Jeremiah 31 verses 31 to 34, we read those at the beginning, and a new temple, Ezekiel chapters 40 through to 43. Although in Jeremiah's day the people had forsaken the Lord, in the future he lovingly promises to be their God, and they shall be my people. Jeremiah 31 verse 32. Although Ezekiel had seen the glory of the Lord departing reluctantly from the temple threshold, Ezekiel 10 verse 18, the prophet priest is privileged to anticipate a full return of that glory. Ezekiel 43, when the glory of the Lord fills the house in that millennial temple. How glad we are that human weakness and failure can never frustrate the purpose of God in relation to his people and in relation to the revealing of his glory. So let me conclude now. We're still in the midst of a pandemic, aren't we? The COVID-19 difficulties, when there are such severe restrictions on gathering with fellow believers, as you know, and preaching the gospel publicly to people who need to hear it. Difficult days we live in. Well, Jeremiah and Ezekiel lived in difficult days. They should have been priests. They should have been serving in the temple, but that option wasn't open to them because of circumstances. But despite that, they served God faithfully, as well as they could, in the capacity that was available to them in divine providence. In his book of Lamentations, Jeremiah writes, "Great is thy faithfulness," Lamentation 3 verse 23. So they had a faithful God, and we have the same faithful God. And they served their God faithfully, and we too must serve our God faithfully in difficult days. Thanks for listening. I know this was somewhat of a bitty message, travelling through two major prophets in the Old Testament, but I hope we can get encouragement from these two men, Jeremiah and Ezekiel, men who should have been priests but turned out as prophets, and they were faithful servants to the Lord. Thank you.